Two reframes on Donald Trump. This is the Eyes of Faith podcast, and I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter. I'm author of this book, Consider My Servant Job. It's a book about Job in the Old Testament, discussing pain, suffering, the human predicament. If you're going through some issues right now with the government shutdown or any other issues at this time of year, give my book a look. If you can't find answers, hopefully you'll find peace. So, two reframes about Donald Trump. But first, yesterday was Halloween. If you want to have a fun experience, ride public transportation on Halloween. I'll just leave it at that. Whatever you're thinking is a lot funnier than what actually happened, but it's a fun experience. So here are the two reframes on Donald Trump. Reframe number one, the devil is the enemy. From the Book of Mormon, the devil, who is an enemy to all righteousness, Alma 34:23. The devil, he being an enemy to all righteousness, Mosiah 4:14. Quote from Brigham Young. Brigham Young. What then is the mission of Satan, that common foe of all the children of men? It is to destroy and make desolate. And since we are inclusive, you can be a good Republican and a good Muslim. Not all Muslims are Wahhabist. I'm in the process of reading the Quran for the fourth time. I have a degree in history, so I'm supposed to do stuff like that. But this is what the Quran says. Quran, Surah 36, verse 60. Did I not command you, O children of Adam, not to follow Satan, for he is truly your sworn enemy? Okay, so two from the Book of Mormon, one from Brigham Young, and to show that, being a Muslim, being a Republican, think about United Arab Emirates. They're better with their money than California is. So choice California, United Arab Emirates. You know where I'm going, and they'll treat me with respect there. Not all Muslims are Wahhabists. Not all Muslims are terrorists. They're potential allies. I also recommend people learning to hablar castellano, speak Spanish. We precisamos la ayuda de los latinos. Republicans need Latinos. Learn to speak Spanish. So that's your first reframe, that Lucifer is the enemy of all mankind. Now here's the second reframe. The second reframe is that Donald Trump is a neighbor you're supposed to love and forgive and turn the other cheek and forgive 70 times 7. And you remember that part about judge not? That also applies to Donald Trump. Now here's the sneaky number 3, sort of the hidden track for those of you who were in college in the 1990s, where you'd have CDs, compact disc with the hidden tracks on it. Here's a hidden track. This Lucifer being the common foe and Donald Trump being a person we need to love and forgive and to judge not. That also applies to Joe Biden, to Fauci, to Kamala Harris, to Bill Gates. It even applies to me. That applies to you. And there's your two reframes. Once you realize that Lucifer is the real problem, not Donald Trump, and once you love and pray to have charity for Donald Trump, not endorsing everything he says or does, and the same thing with Joe Biden and Fauci, their neighbors you're supposed to love, but not endorsing anything that they do, and don't, this loving someone does not exempt them from consequences of prison. Take Erica Kirk's approach to the shooter who killed her husband. Once you love them, your life gets so much easier. You stop being angry. You'll throw open the windows, you'll see the sunrise in the morning. So I'm actually being a consistent Christian because I forgive Donald Trump. I realize that Lucifer is a common enemy. He certainly was Jesus Christ's enemy. So point next, the shutdown lingers. It's on day 32 today, if my chatbot is correct. This underscores why you need to have $1,000 in an emergency fund. And then you have 3 to 6 months of on-hand cash in another emergency fund. So what I do is that you have your what happens? You have your $1,000 in an emergency fund. You might put that in your savings account, so you have equal quick access. Then you put your larger amount, the 3 to 6 funds, in a money market account. Now check your institution. Some institutions have restrictions on money market withdrawals. The one I go to is a credit union, so they're a bit more consumer friendly. But you need to have an emergency fund. You need to have 3 to 6 months of hard cash on hand. and you'll be able to survive this. Because, if you work for the government, these shutdowns do happen. Let's talk a little bit about personal finance. Now, my degree is in history. I have a Bachelor of Arts in History. My minor is political science. So I'm not a financial consultant. I'm not an advisor. Nothing to do in that area. But I'm a human being with experience. So there's this person I follow on X. And so put that in brackets, a person on social media. So this person on social media, he's a lawyer, and he says that he gets 6 figures, and he was complaining that he still had to clip coupons. Well, first of all, regardless of your income, you should always clip coupons. A penny saved is a penny earned. It's marginal movements, line upon line. In fact, the prophet Dallin H. Oaks gave 2 conference talks about this: small and simple things, and then where will this lead? As you do small and simple things, as you save up to get that emergency fund and get those 3 to 6 months worth of savings in your bank account, where will this lead? It leads to peace, happiness, no sweats. Government shutdown, you could write it because you have still have the income coming in. You have this backup emergency fund, and you're not spending credit cards. See, with your emergency fund in a savings or money market account, you're collecting interest. If you rely upon the credit card, you're paying fees. You want to collect interest, or you pay fees. So 6 figures, that's not an income problem. That is a spending problem. And here's where the problems are without even looking to his situation. First of all, you look at your house, then you look at your auto, and then you look at your credit card debt. Dad's gun collection and your wife's shoe collection. That's where the problems are, without even knowing this person. And after I said that, you're all nodding your heads, say, yeah, that's right, that's the problem. So, you solve the problem by downsizing your house, selling one of your cars, sell some of the shoes on eBay, and then you'll be able to survive this thing. News item: Joe Biden's mental acuity report. That told us what we already knew, but we were pressured not to believe. Now, I've been using this expression, the pink elephant effect. This is a negative pink elephant. The pink elephant is trying to get you to believe something that isn't true. A negative pink elephant is trying to get you to disbelieve something that was true. We saw that, what was that Beavis and Butthead thing, him sitting down. By the time you had that one and only debate between him and... this is troubling. There was a conspiracy. Original Sin. Kamala Harris talks about it in her book, whatever number of days. But they're covering it up, and they're accusing us of doing the cover-up. Now, that's what's called the projection diversion tactic. When they accuse Republicans, when the Democrats accuse Republicans of what they themselves are doing, that's a projection diversion tactic, is trying to divert attention away from what they're doing. For example, you're seeing posts about Donald Trump's mental health, and he's narcissistic and insane, but they're silent as a cadaver when they're talking about Joe Biden. Yeah, double standard. Just like Jim Crow, they're benefiting from this double standard. Another news item: sleeveless garments for women. Well, the first presidency approved these, so I just have 2 observations about this. The first one, it's been about 100 years since we've updated temple garments. It was 1920s. Heber J. Grant was president of the church. So it feels like it's about time to do some changes. Secondly, we're still ignoring the counsel found in that famous Isaiah chapter, Isaiah chapter 3 or 2 Nephi 13, about the clothing of the daughters of Zion. Crisping pins and wimples. You remember that one? It's so important. It's in the Book of Mormon. It's interesting. We've had all these talks about modesty, especially modesty to the young woman, the great and spacious, makeup kit, or what was that expression that Elder Holland used? But we're teaching these things, but we're still not quoting Isaiah. What's this Isaiah phobia about? What's your IQ? What's your Isaiah quotient? President Nelson's talked about the second coming, and 2 talks before his passing. You ever had a fireside about studying the Book of Revelation? Well, here's Brigham Young. Let's see. As you see, I do this a little bit on the cuff. So this is, you remember these? You throw these out Well, they're on your phone or your tablet. So look at that. The last days. Ignore me what I say about the second coming. What did Brigham Young say about it? Remember this one? Joseph Smith Manual. Hey, look at that. Second coming in the millennium. No confusion. Look right here. Joseph F. Smith. And where is that at? 44. Look, same picture as the last one. Preparing for the second coming of Christ. Joseph F. Smith. One more. Actually, I'm ignoring George Albert Smith. I didn't get it, but this is like a father to son thing. Joseph Fielding Smith. How about that? Preparing for the coming of our Lord. How about you? I'm scared. What's going on? I'm anxiety. Well, huh. How about these things? Get some answers instead of the crackpot speculation. That old, I'm Muslim Gurk, and I'm going to quote a bunch of patriarchal blessings. These patriarchal blessings about the second coming for my ancestors that you can't verify. Okay, speaking of the second coming and last days, what's your game plan for 2028? Now, President Trump is a lame duck. He can't get reelected, barring a constitutional amendment. And we can never this is what's called malum prohibitum. In the legal theory, there's malum prohibitum, which is a prohibited bad, and you have malum say something that's inherently bad. And a lot of legislation, like the height of the American flag, there's nothing inherently doesn't need to be red, white, or blue with stars and stripes on. The American flag's changed over time. You have the circular Betsy Ross one, the Bennington flag, the '76 one, so you can change the terms of the presidents, but as it stands right now, what's the game plan? Will the president be Kamala Harris? Will it be Gavin Newsom? We're kind of smelling that AOC is going to be a good vice president pick, judging from what's going on in New York with Mamdani. He could be anything. Who's a Republican candidate? Presumably Ted Cruz. J.D. Vance would be good. Ted Cruz would be good. I actually think Ted Cruz and J.D. Vance would be good. Give J.D. Vance some more seasoning time. They threw Obama in there, and he just wasn't quite ready to be president. By the end of his term, he was doing the job well, good on-job training. But Ted Cruz is president. Marco Rubio. What will be our platform? What will be our focus? What's our persuasion game? First of all, what's your game plan for 2008? Or are you getting in a financial situation that you can help these candidates? What are you volunteering? What are you doing on social media? What's your 10-year game plan? What's your 10-year political game plan? Are you thinking ahead? Are you being like a slug that just slides along and eats whatever in front of its path? When you grow up, you turn to Jabba the Hutt with that weird tongue of his. For something that has nothing to do with the previous content, so what's that Monty Python expression now for something completely different? Fantasy conquest. You've heard of fantasy football? This is fantasy conquest. Ancient armies interacting. What would happen? Okay, so what happened to the Vikings went to battle with the Tongans? I have absolutely no idea. I think part of the answer would have to do with the terrain, or where they would be fighting. The Tongans would freeze it up in the north. The Scandinavians would find Polynesia just way too hot, so that'd be a fact. So who invades who? Relax, this is just a joke. Just kind of change the tone of this podcast. Now, I'd like to do some follow-up with the Life Some Pointers. I was surprised with the reaction I got with the Life Some Pointers podcast. So I talked about strategies. That when you go to a situation, you need to have a strategy for how you approach things. Now, I'd like to talk about one strategy. What's your strategy as you get, this is November, so we get Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, but between Halloween and Easter, it's just junk food-orama. So what's your strategy so you eat healthy? Well, you do something I call defensive dining. Now, remember that expression, defensive dining. Say it. 1, 2, 3, defensive dining. You said George Floyd, you can, of course, can say defensive dining. So think about this. This is a strategy. Before you go to a party where you know there'll be a lot of junk food, eat a bunch of celery and carrots, sort of the hard stuff that takes a while to digest. You may eat like about 3 or 6 chicken nuggets to something really solid, so you're not as hungry. And what you're doing, you're eating safe food that you can control. You know, tuna sandwich, maybe some shrimp. Eat a yam, but you have this sort of the hard fibrous food that takes a while to digest, so you feel like you're full. So fill yourself up before you go to the party with healthy food. And as you go there, you'll feel satiated, your stomach will be full, and so you won't munch on the junk food. Another strategy is to bring your own food if it's a potluck. This is the way you put you in control of the situation again. You're bringing your own safety net to this party. So you bring safe food you can eat. Last thing is to make it a game or a contest. Say to yourself, this is a live fire exercise. Will I survive? How much filthy food will you eat? And that's another thing. Just when you see some candy, just say this is filthy food, filthy food. If you eat a bonbon or a macaroon or the Samoa cookies from the Girl Scouts, penalize yourself. Keep a scorecard on yourself. Do that when you go home and you look at it. Now, it's sort of you have to detach yourself to say, okay, I'm playing this game and doing this contest, but remember, your health is at stake here. Make sure your feet aren't getting amputated and you're not going blind. So that's the strategy, defensive dining. Remember that expression and pass it along to a friend. Now here's another section, life some pointers. I talked about strategies. Let's talk about skill sets. You develop good strategies, but then skill sets are the precise actions. Difference between strategic thinking, tactical thinking. This is more of the tactics that you use in a specific situation. For example, one of the skills that's great that you really need to develop is called tweaking, making micro adjustments and nano corrections. Back to President Oak's 2 talks, small and simple things, line upon line, precept upon precept, and then where will this lead? You make this small decision. You eat that cookie. Where will that lead? You save each day from your checking account. You put $1 into your savings account. Where will that lead? Well, a year later, it'll be $365, $366, $365.25 and a quarter. But you're going to have a full savings account. Now, when you think about that full savings account, where you have this emergency fund, how are you feeling about things? Another skill to develop is networking. What rules and principles are behind successful networking? Socializing. Have a big network, and the larger your network, you have the core deep relationships are part of healthy, but you have the networking relationships, the contacts that aren't as necessarily as deep, but will help you get a better job. How about another one, setting up a computer? That skill. It takes about twice as long than you think to set up a computer. And for about 2 weeks, you're spending an hour each day trying to, once again, tweaking that word again, to get things going. Think about that as a skill to develop. Another skill to develop, especially at school, is how to study for a test. You have the strategies, but also the skills for studying for a test. This is something I'm kind of curious about for younger kids. The skill of being tutored by a chatbot. Now, yeah, they make mistakes, hallucinations, but you ask a chatbot a question, can you be tutored and taught by a chatbot? Think about that. That's a skill to develop. Once you develop that skill, how are you going to feel about things? You're going to feel great. Another skill is thinking. Scott Adams, who has been a great thought leader for me, I actually started watching him on X about 10 years ago, where he was just sort of dinking around with it. Then it took on a life of its own. Once again, that's a small and simple thing. He did this, and it became a very large thing where he's influencing the country. But he has this book called Loser Think. He recently republished it and updated it, and he talks about thinking like different things, thinking like an economist, thinking like a lawyer. That book really resonated with me because I did something like that, but not intentionally. I have a degree in history. My minor's in political science. So I can think like a historian, but think like a political scientist. So yeah, I'm actually, with this podcast, I'm using my college education. I have a friend of mine, she's really left. Things got out of control. I had to block her, which I really hate. But she was just accusing me. She was doing these pink elephants on me. She's accusing me of things I didn't say, that I never said, or how come it feels like you support, use that, well, it feels like you're doing this. And it's like, I'm sorry, I can't respond to that question. Feelings aren't facts. But I'm getting a little bit off topic. So she has a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD in psychology. So when I had talked with her, I just noticed she just kept thinking in circles. It's sort of the narcissistic thought where omniscient thinking and thaumaturgy of words, to use Freud's expression, just thought in circles. Think of it this way. I have two cookbooks, historian's cookbook and a political science cookbook. So I said, let's do some historical stuff. Let's make a historical meal. No, let's switch over to political science. She just has 3 cookbooks in psychology. So every time you're talking and eating with her, it's just all psychology. That gets old after a while. I have an American cookbook and I have a Latino cookbook, and all you have is just three Italian cookbooks. You can feel where this is going right now. You just end up thinking in circles if you just have one train of thought. There's this line from an Orson Welles movie called A Touch of Evil, and the character that Orson Welles plays in it says, all a lawyer thinks about is the law. Now, of course, that's your job, but you see how that thought process can limit you. I'd like to make a comment on psychologists and being psychoanalyzed. She did it back to me, and she did this, part of why I had to block her is she did it to me. It was really disturbing when it happened. That you have a friend of yours, and then suddenly they switch, and then they start psychoanalyzing you. Once I cooled down and processed what she did, I just, the first thing I wondered is, okay, look, is what you're doing to me ethical? Because you have this, you're licensed therapist, you have a PhD in psychology, and this could be construed that you're psychoanalyzing me. There's such a thing known as the Barry Goldwater rule, that you're psychoanalyzing people on social media. That raised some ethical questions for me. But I've noticed that with people who get degrees in psychology, they have a tendency for mind reading, or if they lose an argument, they start psychoanalyzing you. I came up with that idea on my own, but son of a gun, I read this book by Karl Popper called The Open Society and Its Enemies. Now, this is in volume 2 of that book, pages 203 to 204. This is what he says, Karl Popper. The psychoanalyst can always explain away any objections by showing that they are due to the repressions of the critic. And the philosophers of meaning, again, need only to point out what their opinions the opponents hold as meaningless, which will always be true, since meaninglessness can be so defined that any discussion about it is by definition without meaning. You see what he's talking about? This is very Germanic wordiness, is that one, they don't talk, they'll just start psychoanalyzing you. You're not wrong. You're having this psychological issue. And they just start, once again, defining things away. You're arguing about definitions rather than things. This is called word jugglery. And it was not Karl Popper. C.S. Lewis talked about this. This essay is called Bulverism. This is a little bit long. C.S. Lewis is British, but he's a fluid writer, but he's still British nonetheless, said Lewis. Suppose I think, after doing my accounts, that I have a large balance in the bank. So you're balancing your checkbook. And suppose you want to find out whether this belief of mine is wishful thinking. So I did my balanced my checkbook. I have money in there. And you think, well, no, this is just wishful thinking. Once again, labeling. thaumaturgy of words. You can never come to any conclusion by examining my psychological condition. Your only chance of finding out is to sit down and work through the sum yourself. So if I know if someone has a balanced checkbook, you can't psychoanalyze a person. You just have to balance the checkbook on your own. When you have checked my figures, then and only when you have checked my figures, then and then only will you know whether I have that balance or not. If you find my arithmetic correct, then no amount of vaporing about my psychological condition can be anything but a waste of time. If you find my arithmetic correct, then no amount of vaporing about my psychological condition can be anything but a waste of time. If you find my arithmetic wrong, then it may be relevant to explain psychologically how I can be so bad at my arithmetic. And the doctrine of the concealed wish, repress things from Karl Popper, will become relevant, but only after you have yourself done the sum and discovered me to be wrong on purely arithmetical grounds. It's the same way with all thinking and all systems of thought. If you try and find out which are tainted by speculating about the wishes of the thinkers, you're merely making a fool of yourself. You must first find out on purely logical grounds which of them do in fact break down his arguments. Afterwards, if you like, go on to discover the psychological causes of the error. You must show that a man is wrong before you start explaining why he is wrong. And that's what psychologists do. They just start explaining away because they're not processing things factually. It's just all the internal things. The modern method is to assume without discussion that he is wrong and then distract his attention from this, the only real issue, by busily explaining how he became so silly. In the course of the last 15 years, I've found that this vice so common that I've had to invent a name for it. I call it bulverism. Yeah, it's really common. Now you have a word for it. Once you name something, you have power over it. And you see this online. When people start mind reading you or psychoanalyzing you, that red flag says, okay, this is bulverism. Someday I'm going to write the biography of imaginary inventor Ezekiel Bulver. So this is sort of a fairy tale. And but sort of this is a fairy tale that illustrates a truth, like Aesop's fables. Ezekiel Bulver, fictitious person whose destiny was determined at the age of 5 when he heard his mother say to his father, I wonder if this actually happened to C.S. Lewis as a kid, who had been maintaining that two sides of a triangle were together greater than a third. Oh, you say that because you're a man. You ever heard that ad hominem attack? You're mansplaining. See, C.S. Lewis, this is C.S. Lewis in the 50s and 60s talking about mansplaining. Oh, you say it because you're a man. At that moment, Ezekiel Bulver assures us, there flashed across my opening mind the great truth that refutation is no necessary part of argument. Assume that your opponent is wrong, explain his error, and the world will be at your feet. Attempt to prove that he is wrong, or worse still, try to find out whether he is wrong or right, and the national dynamism of our age will thrust you to the wall. That's how Bulver became one of the makers of the 20th century. A little bit long, my voice is giving out now. But did you just have an aha moment when I read that, when I started talking about these things? How did you feel? It's like, wait a minute, this has happened to me. The mind reading, the psychoanalyzing, the bulverism, these are all tactics that the left uses. And it goes back to, I talked about this model, and the episode's called Charlie Kirk and the Pink Elephant Effect. So go back there and review it, where I talk about this model in detail, where people on the left base things on feelings and social cues. But when it's true because a person feels it, but that's just an internal thing. And Sigmund Freud talked about it in his essay on narcissism, omniscience of thought, and thaumaturgy of words. And since you're focusing on what people believe rather than facts, that's a different center of gravity. And that's what's going on. It's a little bit sophisticated, but once you start thinking, you can change your thought process and realize what C.S. Lewis said was true. Another tactic that people with that psychologists have used on me is confirmation bias. What confirmation bias? That's a form of cherry picking to support your conclusion. My reply is, well, you're having disconfirmation bias, or what's called also termed slothful induction. It's a form of denialism. You're losing the argument, and you're trying to change the subject about my psychological well-being. That's essentially what it is. It's a red herring. Instead of talking about the facts I'm talking about, you're trying to psychoanalyze me. A little bit long, so we're at 30 minutes now. I should start winding things up. Okay, now we're going back to the skills. Another skill to develop is changing your strategy, and also another skill is to add more skills to your skill set. Learning how to speak another language adds to your skill set. Doing this when I was a kid, I mean, to film something like this, you'd have to go to a studio. I'd have to go to Oakland to Channel 2 Studios and sit down. I'm literally a person in my bedroom. Just, you can kind of see here, I'm just filming this. No theme song. I don't have a producer. It's just me, you, and the truth. At my work, they have free access to Harvard Business Review essays, and at least once a week I try and read 3 of them. They also have Udemy, where you can get certifications, all free, and people just ignore it. We also have tuition reimbursement, but like I said, at least every week I try and get 3 articles in from the Harvard Business Review on how to improve myself. Once again, that's a small and simple thing. 1 article per day, and the cumulative effect of that. Now, another skill to develop is to vary your approach to doing certain things. Use all your tools in the toolkit. The Book of Mormon use it this way when the sons of Mosiah were preaching to the Lamanites. This is from Alma chapter 26, verse 29. It says, "We have entered into their houses and taught them, and we have taught them in the streets," the houses, the streets. "We have taught them upon their hills. We also entered into their temples and their synagogues and taught them." Now you notice how when they're teaching to the people of Ammon, they varied their approaches and locations. Changing your approach and experimentation with doing things is another skill to develop. It's another strategy. Reading different books. Just looking, okay, what's one small thing that I can tweak, that I can improve? What's one small experimenting with new foods? Time to hit the vegetarian section to cut out the meat so you can live healthy. Now, what about negative skills? Touch not the unclean gift, the Book of Mormon says. Is whining a skill? Is being manipulative a skill? Is malingering a skill? Is being dishonest a skill? You think about the technical achievements and the skills needed to rob a bank, rob the Louvre. That just happened. Being a cat burglar is a skill. So you think about that. You can develop skills one way, or you can develop skills the other way. This may be a bit more of a strategy, but think about what blind spots you have. Paying attention to your blind spots, what your weaknesses are. President Oakes, the prophet, gave a talk saying that our strengths can be our downfalls. We always talk about the Achilles heel, place of weakness, but your place of strength can also cause you to tip over and tumble over like a top-heavy statue. During the Cold War, if you saw the movie The Hunt for Red October, they explained this. What happened is the Americans would get behind a Soviet sub. So here's the Soviet sub, and then the Americans would get behind it, right behind the screw. So it'd be hard for the Soviets to find them. They'd be able to tail the Soviet submarines for a while just to surveil them. And so what happened is the Soviets developed a counter strategy to that, and it's called a Crazy Ivan. So what happens is all of a sudden, as a Soviet sub would be turning, you have the American sub, the Soviet sub would just start turning to the left or the right and go around. So it's kind of like 2 subs here, and then they're finding that the Soviet sub would go around here. And with it on the side, they'd be able to detect the submarine. And so once they'd start the Crazy Ivan, the American sub would just have to stop, get really quiet, so the Soviets wouldn't hear them, and to avoid a collision. You need to develop that skill. Find out, okay, what's your blind spot? Can you take criticism correctly? And if you can you adjust it? Also make sure you have a filter. Well, this criticism isn't justified, and this person is being vicious. That's another skill to develop. But can you take criticism correction without being vengeful? My voice is starting to give out, and I've given you a lot of free information here because I care about you, me, and the truth. So that's the passing scene with the eyes of faith. Thank you.